Hey, church. It's really good to be able to speak to you in this way, something different from what I usually do on regular church online service. If you're new here, joining us for the first time, my name is Ising. You can call me Faith as well. I serve as a ministry staff in our church community. Well, today's message, in a way, is like an extension from last Sunday. Totally not planned, not intentional. So, as I was listening last Sunday morning to what Pastor was preaching, I was thinking, wow, that sounds like a great prelude to what I want to talk about this morning. I want to talk about how we are doing this year 2020. Not sure if you have done this, but it feels like this year has been a great season or great year that we take an inventory check of our lives in a very serious, in a very somber way, and asking ourselves what really matters the most, right? In the same time, whether you're Christian or not Christian, perhaps you are thinking a little bit further. Okay, what does faith means? Not my name, of course, but really, you might think about what does faith mean in light of all these things that's happening? What does life mean in the midst of all this that is happening? You might be someone who is personally struggling because certain things, huge things that have happened in your own life. Or maybe you're just reflecting and looking and observing what's going on around the world. Or perhaps you're affected by the friends around you, the people that you care about, they are struggling in this season. That is also getting you to really ponder and reflect about what life and what your faith means. And some of you might be saying that, well, I don't have faith and I just want to go through day by day on my own efforts. Some of you who sees yourself as someone who has faith, you might be challenged and maybe questioning yourself, does my faith matter at all? Or perhaps you might be struggling and saying this to yourself, I seem to be losing my faith in the midst of all this that's happening. Because you're wondering, where is God in all this? And perhaps you might be even saying this, well, without the pandemic season that's going on, I'm already facing struggles of all sorts, all kinds. And those are enough for me to reevaluate about my faith itself. And so I am glad the pastor was establishing this truth last Sunday. He said this, that everyone actually has faith. Even for those who might feel that or think that you don't believe in the existence of God, for that you also have faith as well, because it takes faith to believe in the absence of God. And if so, it's not a matter of whether you possess faith, but it's the matter of where you have placed it. And so maybe as you hear last Sunday's message, whether you are a believer or not, you might have made a certain decision. Okay, I understand what was said, and I have made a certain decision. I want to start anew. I want to put my faith in God anew. I want to put my faith in God with a particular aspect of my life. You made that kind of decision. Or maybe even if it's not because of last Sunday's message, because of this year, you've been reflecting and evaluating about your faith journey. You did make a certain decision in your own life. But it wasn't an easy journey for you. Perhaps for you, it seems like a up and down kind of journey for yourself. Some of you, as you hear this, you might be thinking, nope, I am not thinking about that. I'm still struggling. I still have a lot of doubts. I'm not able, or I don't feel ready to say that I'm ready to put my faith in God fully again. Whatever it is, I hope today's message is a place that you can continue to ponder and process about the idea of faith and understanding everyone has faith. It's the question of where you put your faith in. So a person came to my mind who is known to be the father of faith. Now, as I say this phrase, father of faith, maybe many of you right now, you already know who I want to talk about. And you are right, most probably right. I want to talk about Abraham. I mean, giving someone such a title is saying that this guy is the ultimate role model, right? Ultimate best role model for whatever he's called for, the father of faith. He's the founder and pioneer of showing to others what it looks like to put your faith in something or someone. And in this case, of course, it's God himself. And Abraham himself rightfully owns the name very well. If you're familiar with his story, I'm sure you would say that, wow, I've never seen someone's faith like that before. Consider this, right from the first moment that God called him, saying this: leave your native country, your relatives, and your family's family, your father's family, and go to the land that I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you and make you famous, and you will be a blessing to others. You really, really need to give credit to this man who actually did what he was told, given that God was not even very clear about which land he was going to show him, right? And Abraham just went. For your information, Abraham was doing very well where he was at. He was not someone who is struggling in where he was living for many years and voila, someone gave him a golden opportunity to get out of this land and say, wow, there is a new place that I can flourish, that I can be successful. No, that was not Abraham's life. He was successful right where he was living. He was successful and he was calling that place his home. And that home has all his family there. And to call him to start afresh in a place that God is super vague about, he made a decision and trusted God and moved. Now, even as Abraham was known as the father of faith, and his name was being mentioned many, many years later in the New Testament times, that his name was recorded in the Hall of Faith name list, he was also someone who didn't exactly always put his faith in God. In fact, as he was constantly facing challenges that have great potential to challenge him not to put his faith in God at every point, he really felt those moments, if we call that faith tests. He didn't pass many of those. First, remember, when he first arrived the land that God has called him to stay, to settle in, shortly after there was a famine. And then he had to move out and move towards Egypt for a while. And then as he was about to enter Egypt, he thought to himself, or rather he said to his wife, now I know what a beautiful woman you are. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife. Then they will kill me, but will let you live. Say you are my sister, so that I will be treated well for your sake, and my life will be spared because of you. Imagining what God would be saying and thinking to himself as he was looking at what Abraham just talked to his wife. Abraham, which part was I not clear? Didn't I say I'm going to make you a great nation? How is it that you would think that you would die? And what kind of a man and husband would treat his own wife like that in order to preserve his own life? In that very moment, Abraham just threw away what God has told him and promised him. And he was just focused on his own logic, his own intellect, on how he can preserve his own life. God graciously intervened, thankfully. And perhaps you would think that, okay, that is one lesson that he would remember. But no, there was a second incident like that happened, and he thought of the same strategy, said the same thing to his wife, and God had to graciously intervene in the same way. Talk about man, or rather father of faith. And of course, there was another classic example, right? When we see Abraham and his wife thinking of ways to help God in order to have an heir, to extend their family line, so that God would deliver his promise of making them a great nation. So, what does it mean when we see Abraham as the father of faith? Perhaps today, as we look at the moments where he didn't pass his flying colors of faith tests, there is this reality that we can all relate with Abraham very well. There is this reality where we all will struggle and be challenged to put our faith in God all the time. Now, there are probably significant moments in your life where you have seen that you put your faith in God. Maybe not as dramatic as what Abraham did in the first moment when God called him, but you have some of those similar milestones in your own life, significant milestones. Put it, for example, when you first trust in Jesus. That is one significant milestone as well. And you imagine the exciting adventure that you will begin with God. But like Abraham, when you take that step of journey, when you take that step of putting your faith in God, they don't really lead you further away from the challenges and the problems and the struggles that is involved as you move forward. And many times when you face those moments, God doesn't give you the clear explanations of why He would put you through those moments, right? And because of that, some of you decided, I might as well don't put my faith in God. But really, think about it. Actually, whether or not you put your faith in God, you and I will always face challenges. You and I will always face struggles in life. But it would seem like when you put your faith in God, it seems that challenges are much more. And so challenges and problems or pain at times does either push us to either put our faith more in God, or they could lead us to put our faith in something else or someone else. So for you, friends, as you face challenges, problems, and pain, struggles, or you see the brokenness that's going on, do you see yourself starting to put your faith onto your own human logic and perception over the matter? Or are your instincts looking toward your own capabilities, even when people around you try to tell you what God is trying to say to you? And you think to yourself, seriously, this is really hard. I can't see how God is working in this matter. And God is not explaining clear to me. God is not showing me the answer. I think then since God is not showing me the answer, then I just handle it on my own, right? Now, know this as we learn from Abraham, as we observe what Abraham did. Whenever we begin to shift putting our faith into something else or someone else other than God, we can at times call this fear. And fear has a certain kind of power that drives you to do certain things. For Abraham, it drove him to forget completely or start to doubt about what God has said to him. It drove Abraham to do something that could hurt others. And actually it did. And even for himself, even though it was never his intention. It drove Abraham to attempt redefining on his own terms everything that God has promised him. And he think that, okay, maybe this is what God means. Maybe I have to do this. But he realized then it never would give him the results that God originally intended for him. Well, aside from remembering this hard reality of struggle, but I want to paint this reality that we can relate with Abraham so that we can be comforted that even for Abraham, who is called a father of faith, he too faced such kind of struggles. But as we look at this reality, thankfully it doesn't end there. The second part is this, is you can put your faith in God, whose plan is undeterred by problems that you face in life, but unswervingly anchored on His promises. Now, no matter what kind of problems that you face, whether it's external, like this pandemic that we're facing, that we're still in, or caused by someone else, individual people, or it could be problems that started from within yourself, such as Abraham when he did certain things, problems that you were the one that you started due to the certain decisions that you made. Know this, that there is no problem that could be too powerful to ever change God's purpose and plan for you and for the world. As Abraham's wife decided to give her servant Hagar to Abraham, remember, to be the second wife, so in order to have a son in Genesis 16. Well, we know there are consequences to bear. It ended up that Sarah has to fight with Hagar to fight for their husband's attention and favor, isn't it? There are consequences. But God's plan was still intact. Or no matter how impossible it seemed for Abraham and Sarah to have a child at that old age, it never was a problem in God's sight. That was a very powerful and a lot of times when we read those moments, we would think that, is this like a fairy tale? But no, it is real. It tells us that there is nothing that is impossible with God, because He is faithful to keep His promises. Now, talking about this word promise, you and I have come across experiencing people who have broken promises to us, don't we? And a lot of times, as we go through life, when we experience more and more of these things, and perhaps we are the ones who gave the promise, and we are the ones who broke it. And somehow, this word promise has been cheapened. The value of promise has been devalued. Take for wedding vows as an example. We see marriages happening still very frequently, and we have heard beautiful wedding vows. At the same time, as we look at statistics these days, we know too that divorces are rising. And it goes to say that a lot of times when we say this, when people come before each other to say a wedding vow and say that, I promise, I will, it is supposed to be sacred, but many of us have seen or taken this word promise as something that will be broken. But to God, for Him, He understands the value of promise. He is someone who takes promises that He said very seriously. He is so serious to a point that He made this thing called covenant. And He made this covenant with Abraham. See, at one point, when God told Abraham that He will give him a land to take possession of it, Abraham in reply asked, Sovereign Lord, how can I know that I will gain possession of it? In other words, Abraham was asking God, how will I know you will make good of the promise you just said that you will do? Now, the next moment, God did a ritual with Abraham, which is called the covenant. Usually, this is a ritual that is done between two parties when they want to make a covenant. In other words, a binding contract with each other. Usually, when we talk about contract in today's context, we just sign on the dotted line, right? And then if we do not fulfill the contract, the binding agreement, what we will do is we pay, right? Pay fines or whatever that's mentioned in the agreement. But for them, in Abraham's time, in the Old Testament time, they cut the animals into halves, and then both parties would have to walk past the parts to complete the covenant. Now, this act is simply saying that there will be a curse being placed on both parties, saying, may God make me like this animal if I do not fulfill the demands of the covenant. And so that's how serious it is when we say two parties making a covenant. However, in this ritual, you will realize that it happened in a way that only God walked through the house in the form of a smoke and fire that represented His presence, and not Abraham. So this suggested two things. One, this covenant is dependent on God's commitment alone and not Abraham's. At the same time, God is saying that I am invoking this curse on myself if I should fail to fulfill the promise. Which means this. God is telling to Abraham, I am serious with the promise that I give to you. I am serious with what I've said to you, to the point that I'm putting my name at stake. And surely God is confident on His own that He would not go back on His word. But He did that to tell and assure Abraham that I will fulfill my promise. And that is how God is so serious with every promise that He makes to you, to myself. And so perhaps we need to revisit the value and appreciate the promises that God has given, not just to Abraham, but to every one of us through His word. And of course, there are promises that are conditional upon whether we would seek to live according to His word, to what He said. Then again, actually, He is also very consistent on that, isn't it? If you live according to His principles, He will deliver His promises. So friends, brothers and sisters in Christ, church, today as you hear this familiar story of a man known to be the father of faith, rather than applauding this man whose name is in the hall of faith, right? Perhaps we can look at his life journey anew as the hallmark of God's faithfulness, that we can tell ourselves, remind ourselves, as whatever struggles that you're facing in this season of your life, challenges, pain, you can remember God is faithful. Let's look at the hallmark of God's faithfulness. Because did God fulfill His promise to Abraham? He did. Amidst all the messiness, the many years when Abraham didn't seem to pass his faith test, God still fulfilled His plan. Because His plan was anchored on His promises. So behold on how faithful God is. Recall the times that God has shown you the faithfulness in your life, or even through the Bible, the scriptures. Read of the faithfulness through the lives of many that you have come across. Whether is it recorded in the scriptures, or whether is it the people that you know that live around you, that are still alive. Abraham was just one of them. Abraham was just the first ones of them. Year 2020 might seem to create a huge pause for many of us. Year 2020 might be a season where your life has totally changed. And perhaps you are facing a moment where you are stuck and you're trying all your ways. You are experiencing desperation like Abraham and his wife did. And what you see ahead of your own life is filled with just problems. And you are trying to look for ways to resolve it. Understandably, that's all what we will naturally do. And you're trying to seek for understanding and reasons for all that's happening. And perhaps, and most likely, you are not getting it from God. Know that there's good news, my friends. That what He does give to you is His promise and how we can continue to live by what He said. Because that's the same thing that He did for Abraham. Now, putting your faith in God doesn't mean that you don't do anything in your situation, right? Or sit and do nothing. But perhaps today is a day that you start considering some of these questions as you are reflecting on a particular area of your life or on a situation. Think about this. If I choose to make a certain decision about this particular situation, is it going against what God had originally intended for my life? Provided you are very clear in first hand of what or where He has called you to. Second question is this: if I choose to do this or make a certain decision, am I putting my faith on my own human logic, on somewhere else, on someone else, but God and His promises? Third is this: what are some of the promises of God do I need to hold on to in this season of my life? So, let's take time to ponder these questions together in our own personal time after the service is over. Maybe you can talk about these questions as you reflect with your family over lunch. Or maybe you can take your small group time over Zoom or over a meal to just share some of these questions that you are reflecting on. Now, if you're not part of our church community, we want to welcome you. If you are looking for someone to process with, please connect with us, freely connect with us. There are details in the YouTube description, and you can go to our church website to find out who we are and how you can contact us. And we can process this together. It is part of everyone's journey. So even when you are not a Christian, this is for you as well. And we have learned something together today, isn't it? Whether you're a Christian or not, we all struggle to put our faith in God. But God has shown us today, through the life of this man called Abraham, who has faced all kinds of struggles on not putting his faith in God. And yet, through his life, we have seen the faithfulness of God. We have seen that whatever God has promised and whatever God has planned, it will come to pass. And so today, once again, I want to invite you, and even for myself, to take time to remember God's faithfulness. In the midst of many things that might challenge us to put our faith in God, let's behold his faithfulness and trust that in the midst of waiting, in the midst of our struggles, in the midst of wondering, we have the promise of God and we can put our faith in God himself. Let's take heart that God is faithful and he will be faithful to the end.